Have you ever wanted to own slaves? Have you ever felt like you were born roughly 250 years too late? If yes, why are you watching my videos? I'm mixed, man. Like, my ancestors went through that. I really don't appreciate that at all. Like, Pikmin isn't even about slavery, man. Like, what? Anyways, let's talk about the game about little dude segregation based on skin color. Pikmin is pretty cool. It lets me live in the shoes of a person the size of a peanut who comes into contact with a collection of little dudes who are all the same species, but at least have evolved to be a little bit different. They're also murdering machines. I've always really liked Pikmin. It's kind of right next to Luigi's Mansion in my mind as I played them around the same time. It's one of those games that's super simple, but also really genius when you sit down and think about it, and I always liked that in a game. At the time, it was a new take on real-time strategy games. Typically, real-time strategy has you send units to a place to do their own thing, and you give them commands when possible. These types of games are all about multitasking and can get very complicated, so Nintendo, as you know, Nintendo doesn't like making things complicated usually, so they make you an active player on the field. This puts you in the location, and it also brings up new problems like how do you give commands, how do you multitask efficiently, and how do you do what needs to be done in a timely manner. It's almost its own genre at this point, and yet somehow this is still the most simple out of the main 3 games, in which I will be covering all 3. But just because it's simple on the surface doesn't mean there isn't complexity. The game starts off slow by knocking Olimar out of space and nearly killing him on impact with Earth's surface. You turn around and your ship is absolutely messed up, so now you gotta pick this Min over here, form an army, and get all your ship pieces back, all while you remember your family who probably thinks you're dead. It is a very simple premise, but it's cute and it gets the job done. You enlist little dudes to fight for you and work for you, and in exchange, if you're not completely incompetent, they increase in numbers. Win-win. Gameplay is just super interesting because, like I described before, it's like an RTS, but you aren't just commanding things from a disembodied cursor. You can die yourself, and while it's pretty hard to do that, it's possible and at least raises the stakes a little bit, but what really raises the stakes is the 30-day time limit. Pretty much from the opening cutscene you can tell that this is Earth, and on Earth we breathe oxygen, but to Olimar, as an alien, oxygen is poison. So he has a very limited supply of whatever the fuck he's breathing for 30 days. And if you don't get off the planet in 30 days, Olimar fucking dies. As a kid, the 30-day time limit totally ruined the game for me because I'd only be able to get 27 parts at most before I ran out of time. But now as an adult, I really don't think much of it. It's really not that difficult to get all the parts in the allotted time span that they give you. It's a lot of slack. This stopped being a thing after this game, and do I miss it? Kinda, but I'm not really complaining that it's gone. It was never my favorite thing about Pikmin. What never gets old in these games is the areas. They're so interesting because not only are you slowly dying, you can see the remnants of some sort of civilization, which is what I really like here. But you won't really see much of that until Pikmin 2 to really understand what's going on. In this game, the environments are far more just nature than they are nature taking back the land like they are in the second game. And the music for these areas is always so good. Pikmin wouldn't even be half as memorable without its music if you ask me. It's therapeutic. Forest of Hope can cure every disease the government just doesn't want you to know. That's the stuff right there. The music's also dynamic, which I can honestly make a whole video about because I just love dynamic music and the different types. If you don't know, Pikmin music actually changes depending on what you're doing. I actually want to go more into this in Pikmin 2 because I can go way more in depth there, but as it is here, I love the soundtrack for this game. For this game, there's the main area theme and then a combat variation for when enemies are nearby. It's quite simple, but it gives the extra something, you know? And this also applies at sunset when there's a more calming variation of the theme that plays, as well as a combat version for that. All of it is to fit the tone of the game, which the music does by using instruments to give a small sense of scale, but also a sense of wonder and exploration, because you're exploring an alien world after all. If you want a good video about the dynamic music from someone who actually knows about music, please check out this video. It's very good and goes into depth on why it works as well as it does. And another big part of Pikmin is, of course, the enemies. Pikmin enemy design is just as interesting, if not more, than its music. Some cute, some weird, some indescribable. I always thought the ecology of these little creatures was super interesting. Some of these animals are entirely believable creatures, and they get explained in the true ending cutscene. It really grounds Pikmin in its own world, and I really enjoy that. Even its boss fights feel like they all belong, even if some are this. This game only has 3 mandatory boss fights, but they're all enjoyable. None of them out of the mandatory bosses are that hard either, but they do get a bit more difficult when you do the optional bosses. But none of them really stand up to him. Like, what the fuck is this thing? It hatches from this egg, and it's the single most destructive creature in this game, and it's so hard to describe. Every Pikmin just has this horror type enemy, and I fucking love it. Everything about Pikmin is just cute and child friendly, and then suddenly you have nightmare fuel. It really puts into perspective just how weird Pikmin is as a game, and it only gets weirder as the series goes on. This game is when the series is at its most tame, and I can't wait to talk about how it evolves in the next games. But when all is said and done, Pikmin is a very short game, and I mean very short, almost as short as this video. This game is designed to be speedrunned, and if you're smart enough, you can beat this game in like 3 to 5 hours, faster if you're a god. There's some side content in the main game that only occurs in certain places and on certain days that are pretty much mini bosses, and ways to get a lot of Pikmin, but they aren't mandatory like I said before, so they're a cool extra thing you can do, and it's always appreciated. And there's also a really cool challenge mode, but it's not really my thing. Pikmin is a very, very good game that has some infrequent, annoying flaws, but there's nothing really too egregious, like the AI for the Pikmin being somewhat primitive and them fucking... Dude, stop. Hey, stop! Fuck! Aside from them doing their own thing from time to time, they do pretty much what you want consistently. And I really enjoy my time with this game every time I replay it, so whenever I get the final cutscene, it always feels good. The final boss might take a bit too long and isn't too fun to fight. After an entire game of these cute after-day logs of Olimar missing his family and he says goodbye to the Pikmin and flies away, I always think about how much I love this game. And not only that, but the Pikmin have learned from Olimar to be autonomous sentries, killing all those who happen to exist around them. It's fucking adorable. I'm so proud of them. Get his ass, Jimmy. Yeah! Pikmin will always be a favorite game of mine. It's short, sweet, and to the point. No useless padding, no extra fluff, it does exactly what it set out to do, and I appreciate that a lot. But it's not my favorite game in the series. Pikmin is a must-play Nintendo classic and deserves more love, especially from Nintendo, because they sure as hell don't give a shit. Now if you'll excuse me, I'll be separating these Pikmin based on skin color as the game encourages me to do so with my dedicated segregation button.